All right. Hi, guys. Unfortunately, my son is really sick. He's sleeping right now, so I'm going to record the video of the lesson that you guys will be learning, and we will go ahead and work through this together. I've also uploaded the homework, so then when this is finished, you can go ahead and work on the homework on campus. I copied the problems from the book that you guys will need, so you can go ahead and work on that in class, even if you don't have your book with you. All right, with that said, let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the video so that I can lay this flat and we can continue. Okay, so you guys already had an introduction to this lesson on the off-campus learning day, but we're going to go ahead and work through it just as a class. So our next study, our next concept that we're studying is adding and subtracting rational expressions. Now, if you're thinking about rational expressions, remember that's basically fractions, and because we're looking at expressions with variables. So before we dive in, let's go back to adding a basic set of fractions. So if you had 3/4 plus 3/16, hopefully you're reminded I need a common denominator before I can add. But as you're looking at what is the least common denominator, well, think in your head, what would be the least common denominator? Hopefully you did not say 4 times 16 or 64. Hopefully you said the least common denominator, or you can say the smallest number that both of those will multiply into is 16. Now, an easy way to look at this is to break down 16 and look for something that is already shared in the other denominator. So if I break 16 into 4 times 4, I can see that they both already share the 4. So essentially, I would need to multiply by what's missing. So I'd multiply this fraction by 4/4, and I can see that the smallest denominator that they both multiply into is 16. Okay, so you would not simply multiply the denominators together. There's a smaller common denominator than 4 times 16 or 64, and that would be 16. And the key is you picked this number because 16 is the smallest that 4 and 16 would multiply into. So let's go ahead and think about this concept utilizing the following examples. If you had 3 over x minus 1 plus 3 over x minus 1 squared, well, look at it in the same way that you might look at this top example up here. Think about this as 4 and 16 is 4 squared. If you're looking at what is the least common denominator, they both already share an x minus 1. In fact, I could write this out as x minus 1 times itself. Since they both already share an x minus 1, I'm going to be multiplying the left fraction by what's missing. So it has one x minus 1, but it needs one more. And we know that when we're multiplying a fraction, we really have to multiply it by the value of 1. And any number divided by itself is 1. So that's why we're multiplying by x minus 1 over x minus 1. So if you were asked what is the least common denominator for these two fractions, it would be x minus 1 squared. All right, let's take a look at the next example. On your own, think about what would be the least common denominator between all three fractions. And if the sub could pause the video, give everyone the ability to think about it, and then replay. Okay, the least common denominator was 2x minus 1 cubed. If you needed to, you could have drawn it out. 2x minus 1 times 2x minus 1 times 2x minus 1. That's kind of hard to write. So this one here also is 2x minus 1 times itself. And I see that they all already share 2x minus 1. But the least common denominator, you need to have all the denominators multiplying into the same thing. And we don't need 4 2x minus 1s because they all already share a 2x minus 1. So if I was actually performing this problem, I would multiply this fraction by 2x minus 1 squared over 2x minus 1 squared. And this one I would multiply by 2x minus 1 over 2x minus 1. then they would all obtain that least common denominator. Okay, that's how to identify a least common denominator. Let's go ahead and see how would we work with just a normal fraction we're used to, and then we'll actually start working with these algebraic expressions. Add or subtract. In this first one, we are adding. Add 3/4 plus 5/8. You guys know we need a common denominator. What's the least common denominator between 4 and 8? Hopefully you're looking at that saying, oh, 8 already has a 4 in it. 8 is 4 times 2. So this piece is just missing a 2. So the least common denominator is 4 times 2, or you could say 8. Then as I'm looking at the process, we would multiply and we would have 6/8 plus 5/8 equals, and you guys know that would create 11/8 because we add the numerators and keep the denominator. All right, looking at this next piece, 4/15 minus 7/11. You might look at 15 and say, well, 15 is 5 times 3. Does 11 share any factors with 5 and 3? But unfortunately, it does not because 11 is a prime number. So in that case, then the least common denominator is going to be the denominators multiplied by each other, 15 times 11, which is the same as 165. So I'm going to multiply this piece by 11 over 11. I'm going to multiply this piece by 15 over 15, and that will create 44 over 165 minus, let's see, 7 times 10 is 70, 7 times 5 is 35, 70 plus 35 is 105 over 165. And hopefully you remember with subtracting, you also need that common denominator, but once you have it, you keep it, and then you subtract the numerators. So 44 minus 105, that should give us negative 61 over 165. And remember, the last thing that we would check is we would see, can this fraction be reduced? Because all fractions are simplified when they have no common factors left in the numerator and denominator. This one is simplified. There's nothing that there's no common factors in 61 and 165. All right, we've warmed up. We're ready. Let's go ahead and see how would we perform this addition problem. Well, as I'm looking at this, I see m minus 1 and m plus 1. And before you continue, you want to ask, what is the least common denominator? A common mistake that I see, our students just want to add to the problem or subtract to the problem, but we can't do that. We can only work with factors. And to drive this point home, imagine thinking about using the number 6, for example. Let m equal 6. This is an example. You don't even have to write this down. But if you did, you would have 6 minus 1 is 5, and 6 plus 1 is 7. What's the least common denominator between 5 and 7? They don't share anything. You'd have to multiply them by each other. So if the factors are different, you're going to have to multiply them by each other. So I'll multiply this one by m minus 1, and I'm going to keep that in parentheses, over m minus 1. And I'm going to multiply this one by m plus 1 over m plus 1. So what is the least common denominator? It's m minus 1 times m plus 1. If you would like to, you could multiply that through and call that m squared minus 1. But it's actually easier to just keep it in factored form so we can check in the end, are there any common factors that we could still reduce? Now, let's talk about how to simplify this. Now that we have a common denominator, I need to simplify the numerators. And the key that you need to keep in mind here is that we are taking m plus 1 and multiplying it by this numerator. And if you multiply a binomial by a binomial, you need to FOIL. So let's go ahead, remind ourselves, how do we do that? First times first would create us m squared. Outside would create positive 1m. Inside would create positive 1m. And last would create a positive 2. Now this is getting kind of crammed, so I'm going to do the same thing that I did in the above example. I'm going to go ahead and show what the numerator simplifies to, which is currently over my common denominator, this guy, which is m plus 1, m minus 1. And as I'm simplifying this, the only piece I can see when I FOILed is 1m plus 1m is 2m. So I have m squared plus 2m plus 2. And now I'm adding the fraction next to it, which has a common denominator of m plus 1, m minus 1. But now we need to do the same thing, and we need to FOIL this numerator. All right, if you could turn to your partner, let's do the person with the most amount of siblings, or if you have the same amount, whoever has the oldest sibling, if you could share what you would FOIL that numerator to be. And then sub, if you could pause the video, and then when everybody's ready, come back and unpause. All right, it created m squared minus 2m plus 1. Hopefully your partner was like, oh, I would get m squared minus 1m minus 1m plus 1. And that's what that simplified to be. Now that I have the same denominators, I'm going to combine the numerators, just like we did up here. Up here, we combined 6 and 5 and left it over 8. So here, we're going to combine all those numerator pieces and leave it over m plus 1, m minus 1. And I continue. So are there any like pieces? Why, yes, there are. M squared and m squared would combine to be 2m squared, 2m, and negative 2m. Well, that combines to be 0, so that cancels. And then 2 and 1 would add up to be 3. And I just realized that I made a mistake, and you guys were probably like, Ms. Prempas, you need more sleep. No, I'm sorry, I made a mistake here. 1 times 1 is not 2. 1 times 1 is 1, which means this guy should have been a 1. Probably caught that. Maybe you even told the sub. I apologize, but I caught it now. So make sure you saw 1 times 1 is 1. That's indeed true, which means this is not 3. 1 plus 1 does give me 2. Now, we can box this as long as we make sure there's no common factors in the numerator and denominator. So something you might want to do to check is factor anything that can be factored. And I see in this numerator, they both share a GCF of 2. So I would take that out as m squared plus 1. But as I'm viewing this, hopefully you remember from the last unit, if there's a plus sign in between two perfect squares, you cannot factor. So either of these answers are good because the fraction does not have any common factors in the numerator or denominator. So we've simplified and we are finished. All right, let's take a look at another one. Here, can you recognize what the least common denominator would be? On your own, think about what that would be. All right, hopefully you're saying 12p. Don't just multiply everything by each other. They already share a factor of p. So we don't need any more p's. They all already have one. If I looked at the number 4, 4 is 2 times 2. So I can see there's a 2 and a 2, but this guy's missing a 2. So I'm going to multiply it by 2 over 2. And then furthermore, here is a 3, but this guy's missing a 3, this guy's missing a 3, and the number 4 has 2 2's. So this guy's going to need a 2 and a 2 as well. So we're going to need a 3, a 3, a 2, and a 2, aka 2 times 2 times 3 is 12. And 2 times 2 times, oh, I got to fix this one, 3 over 3 is 12. And 2 times 3 times 2 is 12. Now, if you instead were like, that's a lot of numbers, and you just multiplied that by 4 over 4, yep, that's great. That creates 12p. If you just multiplied this one by 3 over 3, that will create a 12p. And you could have just multiplied this one by 6 over 6, which is 2 times 3. And that will create a 12p. No matter what you did, you had to create 12p in each denominator. So 4 times 8 is 32. So I have 32 over 12p. plus 3 times 5 is 15 over 12p, plus 6 times 9 is 54 over 12p. Now, all my denominators are the same, so I'm going to keep that common denominator, and I'll add the numerators. 32 plus 15 is 47. 47 plus 54 will give me 101, I believe. Let me check that. I don't have my calculator on me, so yep, 101. All right, so we have 101 over 12p. All right, let's try two more before I let you guys work on homework. First things first, as you guys have been identifying your least common denominator, you've hopefully been noticing that factoring is a huge component. Always make sure your denominator is in factored form. It will help make your life easier. You won't be working with as much multiplication, and it'll make sure that your fractions are simplified. So let's review how to factor. Looking at this denominator, as we factor it, it's a trinomial, so I know I'm going to break it into the two parentheses. There was no GCF, so I use my trial and error skills. The last term's negative, which tells me I'm going to have different signs. Undo the F in FOIL, x times x would give me x squared. Undo the L in FOIL. If you make it a positive 2 and a negative 1, when I check the OI, negative x plus 2x creates a positive x. All right, turn to your partner, whoever has the least amount of siblings. You share with your partner what this denominator would factor to and how you'd factor it. And sub, if you could pause the video and then restart. Hopefully your partner had 2 negative signs because the last term was positive and they chose factors of 4 and 1. Okay, if you would like to, even in your homework, you could white out the original because we just made it into its new and improved form, its factored form. And now we're looking at what is that least common denominator. Well, the first thing you want to ask is, do they already share any factors? Hopefully you're saying, why, yes, they share x minus 1. Awesome. So I don't need any more x minus 1s. They both contain 1. What is the left fraction missing? It's missing an x minus 4. So I'm going to multiply that by x minus 4 over x minus 4. And as I look at the right fraction, that's missing, well, hopefully you're thinking in your head, what is it missing? It's missing an x plus 2. So we're going to multiply by x plus 2 over x plus 2. Now, as we simplify this, we do have the least common denominator created. So that now in multiplying that, this first denominator is going to be x minus 4, x plus 2, x minus 1. And the second denominator has the same thing. You can rearrange those factors. Multiplication is what we say commutative. So we have x minus 4 times x plus 2 times x minus 1. Now the numerators. You guys know that we have to FOIL, or in this case, just distribute. So that's going to create an x squared minus 4x. Now I do want to talk about this guy right here. This is a minus. This typically throws lots of people off. Let me try to help you in not being thrown off by this. What I would recommend is change it to a plus negative and then keep that negative with the 2. The reason people mostly get thrown off by this is they just distribute the 2 and then they don't distribute the negative, which is important for the process. But if you just change it to a plus and you're distributing the negative 2, now you're going to be fine in simplifying throughout. So I'm going to distribute that negative 2 and I would have negative 2x, and then negative 2 times positive 2 would create a negative 4. All right, now as I combine these, my denominator is the same. So I'm going to put them over that common denominator, x minus 4, x plus 2, x minus 1. And now let's combine combine all the pieces. So we have x squared is lonely by itself, but then I have negative 4x and negative 2x. What does that create? Negative 6x, you're right. And then I have minus 4. Now, I could try to factor this, do a plus negative situation because of that minus, but there's no factors of 4 that will add up to negative 6x. So I know that can't be factored, And this is indeed in its reduced form. All right, last one. Why don't you try this on your own? The sub can keep playing the video, and if you get stuck, you can look up here. I'll be working this out just quietly, hoping that we all are working on this, getting to that right answer. Okay, as you guys are going, check to see that you have the right least common denominator. You should be obtaining y minus 1 times itself, or you could say y minus 1 squared times y plus 1. And then I'm going to keep working through this. If you could do so as well, please. Okay, check to see that you got the right answer. If you didn't change it to a plus negative, make sure you distributed that negative to the two terms in the second numerator. So you should have a negative y squared and negative y, which means that the y squared and the negative y squared add up to 0. And negative y, you could look at that as a negative 1y plus a negative 1y would create negative 2y. And that's our final answer. All right, you guys go ahead and work on homework. Have a great rest of your day.